For this video, I've added a few more examples to our demo application, which show how to accomplish commonly needed techniques when building web apps. So first thing I've got here is a little application which shows the response of a REST API. And all this REST API does is guess the age of a person by their name. So type in Joe and it'll just give us a response here. And that's coming from a REST API that we'll look at. And I've got another API here that just in the background shows a little bit more how to do a little bit more complex call. So we type in a zip code. I'll make one up here, 2345. I don't know if there's a zip code. Yes, there is. That gives us the temperature and the wind speed, and we save the timestamp. So it sort of stores a history of weather at any zip code we type in. And then this is, I think, a very extensible and useful example. What this does is it reads an API, this particular API here. So we've got just a bunch of data that's output by this. And you can see it's a list of dictionaries, and each dictionary we've got an ID, a person's name, their username, email, a sub-dictionary of address information, phone information, and another sub-dictionary containing company information. And what this does is it builds a sort of repeating panel UI display that nicely displays all of that JSON information. This, if you think of any sort of website like Amazon or other websites that have maybe blog posts, is a common sort of web development task. So on Amazon, you don't see a grid of results. You see a nicely formatted layout for each of the results and the items that you're searching for, which maybe shows a picture and has some information about the thing you want to buy in a nice layout that's nicely formatted. So that's what we're doing here. We're taking the data from this API and presenting it in repeating panels. I think that's one of the most important things to learn how to do, and we'll get into how to do that. And I did the same thing with a bunch of images here. These are all live webcams that we can, if we refresh, you'll see they change and show live. With a little CSS to make everything pretty. Okay, so let's take a look at how each of these things are built. We'll first take a look at the age guess API, and there is a little table here. I'm going to save this information to the database. So we've got a table with a column called guessed age and another column called name. And you can see there are text and integer columns. And there is a little bit of server code for this and a little bit of client code, not much at all. So on the back end, what I did here was write some Python code. We just got one little function. We're importing the requests library, which in Python is the main library we use to read REST APIs or really any other HTTP resource. So we import that. We have to pip install that on the server. And then we have this function called guess age. And when we're calling from a front-end function, we always pass the item, and then the one other parameter we're passing here is the name of the person. And we're setting a variable here called R. And what we're doing is getting the output of this concatenated URL. So we're concatenating name to whatever's been passed. And then we're taking the JSON value here. And let's just take a really quick look at what that looks like. So if we do this, and we go to that website, and we put in the word Nick, what it's going to do is give us a little bit of JSON back, count, the name, and the guessed age. So I guess I'm 58. And so that's all that's doing is requesting that info, getting the JSON, and then we're returning from the function the age value. from that return dictionary, passing that back to the front end. So that's our guessAge function that runs on the server in Python code. On the front end, we have what you've seen many times already in previous examples. We have an on-field change event handler. So whenever a field is changed, we are going to run this bit of code. And so the first thing we're going to do is get the name which has been entered. So we're going to take the value of that field that has been changed. If I wanted to, I could put some conditional here and say if the field is the one we want. But for now, we'll keep this simple, and we'll say we're going to set this name variable to be the value of the field which has been changed. And then we are going to run the guessAge function that we had on the back end. We're going to pass it the name, and we're going to get the returned age value. As long as there's a value, as long as the value is returned, we are going to set the guessed age field value to that returned age value. So fairly simple. We call this function, return the age from the API, and then set the guessed age field value. So very simple. That's what you saw here. We create a new field or go into an old field. Let's go ahead and do this with a old field. I'll set this now maybe to be Tim, and that's guessed to be 82, and then we save the value. So really simple, and of course we have our normal no-code grid features that are built into Jam.py. Okay, so we're going to now do the next most complicated thing. We're going to run this weather API. It's a very similar kind of template. We'll get our weather API table here. So there's a table associated with this task, with this page. That's a table that has 4 columns. We're going to store a temperature, text value, a time step, date time, a wind speed, text value, and a zip code text value. I made these text values because some of the zip codes, for example, if you have a 0 on the front, you set that to an integer, it won't, it'll cut off the 0. So we want to make sure that we have a text value that can have any set of characters there. Okay, so we have those fields set up using the no-code schema builder, and then we have again a client module and a server module. Very similar to what we saw before, but a couple extra features here. There's just a little bit of commenting about what this does. We're importing the requests Python module again, and we're also importing the OS module from the standard library. And the reason we're doing that is because I need to have a key to run this API. So we use the OS get environment function to grab a key that I have set up on the server. So we set an environment variable at the command line in the same environment where we're running the server. This keeps us from having to put any private information directly in the code, so we can share our code without other people seeing the key. So we set that value, which is gotten from the environment variable, to this variable API underscore key. If that doesn't exist in the environment, then we print out a little error, so we can see that. And then here we're going to construct a call to the open weather map API. And again, let's just do that in our browser. You can do this. You may have seen tools like Postman, or you can just use some command line tools to do this. So what we'll do is set this. Oh, you know what? I actually can't do that because I don't want to put the key here. But this would be the same as if I just typed a zip code here and then typed in my API key, and it would give us back some JSON, just like you saw in that last API. And so what we're going to do here is use the request library to get the response from that URL. We're going to set the variable JSON to be the JSON that's retrieved from that response. And then from this function, we are going to return a couple of values that come from that JSON. So here, we're getting from this dictionary called main the temp value, and then we're getting from this dictionary called wind the speed value. And we're setting those to temp and wind speed keys inside this dictionary that we're returning from the function. So very simply, we're calling the API, getting the temperature and wind speed, returning that from this backend function, and of course, handling any errors. I've got a couple little zip codes here, so we can go ahead and run that right now. The front end function works really similar to the last example, just does a little bit more. So we're responding to an on-field changed event in the user interface. And we're setting a zip code variable to be equal to the value that was changed. So we're giving that entered zip code. And then we're running the get weather function on the back end that you just saw, passing it the zip code. And then getting the returned weather data, which is that wind speed and temperature. If there's an error, we're handling that. And then, if there is some weather data, we are setting the temperature value in the user interface row to be that temperature value that's gotten returned, and we're setting the wind speed in the user interface to be the wind speed that was returned from the backend function. Otherwise, we're returning a little error. So hopefully very simple to follow, and that lets us do this. Enter a zip code. When that's changed, it gets the information back from the API and populates it into the user interface. Fairly straightforward, but a really common set of activities in any sort of modern web development. Probably the most common set of things you do is call APIs when you're integrating with third-party tooling. Okay, now for the this repeating panel example, here we don't have any tables defined. We're not going to use anything from the database, although we could just as easily do that and integrate the same way you've seen. We have a client module, and we have a server module. So again, let's just take a quick look at the server code. Again, we're using the requests library, and we have this function called get JSON data. Again, from the front end, we always return always pass the item parameter, and then we pass any other values that we want to pass to the backend function. So here we're setting the URL of this website, which we took a look at before. That's just this little bit. Getting a bunch of listed dictionaries with all of these keys and values for each user. And requesting that using the request library. And we're setting the users variable to be the JSON that's returned there. And here you can see we're printing out the that bit of data, and then we're returning that to the front end, and of course handling any errors. So very simple code on the back end just to get some of the data from this API. On the front end here, this is maybe a long confusing function the first time we look at it. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a look here at what we've got, and then I'm going to simplify it a little bit. Let's take a look at this. This is the display API response. So we've got a pretty complicated layout here with a lot of CSS and some layouts. But I'm going to do this simply, and I'm also going to show you how I actually built this using ChatGPT. And it's very, very simple to do this sort of thing, even if there's a lot of code using tools like ChatGPT. So I'm going to comment out this current version. We'll come back to it in a sec. But we'll use this very first version. I'll kind of go through a little version history. So this was the first version that got working. A little bit less code. Take a look at how that works. We'll run the application again. And now you can see a little bit simpler layout. Just shows the name, username, and the email from each of those returned user dictionaries. Let's take a quick look at how that works. So remember, we have this function on the back, what's called get JSON data. And to build the front end here, we don't have a grid. This is all a custom layout. So what I did was in the index.html for the project, create a little tiny template section. The only thing in this template section is a single div called API repeating panel. And that's it. And that's called by its class name. So we'll go back into our JavaScript, and you can see, like we've done in all the other examples, we are cloning that API repeating panel template, emptying the default form view, and appending the template to show it. That's been the same thing we've done in every one of these custom HTML examples. And then we have a function called render layout, which we're going to use to fill that div with all of these repeating panels. And so what we're going to do is go through the data that gets returned by that server function, by the get JSON data function. We're going to take the returned data and call that rows, assign the variable label rows. And if there's an error, we'll handle that. And then here, what we're going to do is create a new, you've seen a little bit of this in the past, but we're going to build on it a bit here. We're going to create a new variable called repeating panel. And what we're going to do is look for that div called API repeating panel. We're going to empty it. So if there's anything in the panel, we'll empty it. And then for each of the dictionaries in that returned set of rows from the back end, we're going to define this variable called row item. So for each of those rows, we are going to create some little bits of HTML that are added to the div on the template. So we're going to add a thing we're calling card here, which is just a div, sort of a layout. This is a bootstrap type of style. And then we are going to add a card body, which is another div. Again, another bootstrap little stylistic thing. And then we are also adding or creating a little header, which we're using the bootstrap card title style for. And we're adding the name value from the JSON. So we have in the JSON the name value. Taking that out, and we're setting the text of that H5 tag and appending it to the card body. And then we're creating a paragraph tag, and we're getting the user name value. So that's this little bit here from our returned dictionary, appending that to the card body as text, along with this little bit of text that says username, and another paragraph, and we're getting the email from each of these returned dictionaries, and putting that to the card body. And here we've just added some more data here that's not going to be shown, which is the ID. And then we're appending the card body to the card, and then appending to the repeating panel that card. So we're sort of building up a bunch of HTML, pulling out the values we want from the returned data from the backend function called the REST API, and then going through this loop where we're just appending multiple cards to this layout, which we've defined, a template layout, which we defined, and each of those are built by going through each of the rows that are returned, each of the items in the return data, each of the items in that dictionary. So fairly simple. Then we just render the layout, and of course we run that render layout function. Of course that all exists right in the onViewFormCreated function that's executed when the form is created. So this is what we get for that. Now, to make this a little bit more interesting, I went into GPT, and I'll kind of show you a little bit of this GPT interaction, ChatGPT. So I asked it to create some more styling to make that look a little cooler. It's basically the same thing, but now we have some CSS styling to add. And let's run this again. You can see there's a little bit of styling here. You can see as you hover, it pops out a bit. And then I'm going to step further and did all of this. Let's go back here, and we will add now the final version, which basically just did some more styling and included all of the values in the return CSS. So if I save that, you can see now when we go back into our refresh and go back into our display, we get a little bit more of a card with the header and some more information, and all the information in those sub dictionaries that are in each of the returned dictionaries from the API. Okay, so all the same sort of work, just a little bit more detail, and I'll show you the CSS here too. So again, we start by wiping out the default view form, appending this template that we've created, which is just a div, and then we get the data from the server using this function on the back end, which is using the requests library, handling some errors, calling this little div the repeating panel, emptying it, and then going through each of the rows that were returned by the backend function. So we do that here, and we're going through each of those rows and doing the same thing we did before. So we've got a little card div, and we've got a little card header div, a card body div, and now we're adding a little bit more than we did in the past. But basically, this is just the email, the phone, the website value, and constructing an actual HTML link here. So we can see an href with a target that opens up to a new page. So if we click on that, it opens up the page. Just some paragraphs otherwise. And then getting the information out of the address dictionary and appending all of that to a nicely constructed little bit of a paragraph and div tags that are going to be displayed. So the same technique, just more information. Here we're pulling out the company name, getting the information out of this company dictionary, and then pulling out the company name, the catchphrase. And here you can see this is emphasized, and so on. And then putting that all together and displaying it. Now, the thing here also is that I've got a bunch of CSS for that. So here you can see for the custom card div, we've got background color set and a little border radius so the edges are rounded, some shadow, a margin, and so on. And then there's a hover effect added to that custom card, and then a little card header CSS, so background color patterning, font weight, setting it to bold, and so on, setting a border radius again. Here I changed this a bit. I originally had a particular color and so forth in mind, but I went ahead and changed that. Here I got this color. I went ahead and changed it to match the color that was in the application already. So I kind of commented out the original code that was created here, and so you can see we have more here to style, and that's where we get the look of these cards. So not that hard to do, and this is particularly easy these days because we don't have to write any of this CSS by hand. I'll just kind of show you a little bit of what I did here. Let's see, this. So I'm using Jam.py to build an application which reads the REST API, and I showed it the API, showed it what the output looked like so that it knew what actual values were going to be included, what keys and values were going to be included. So a little bit of understanding what we're going to be working with, and you can see here it built that function in the back. We don't need any of this because we're not running it from command line. And then I showed it. I have a div API, and I explained basically what I wanted it to do. And you can see here it came up with the code needed to build that section. So all this is very, very, very quick and fast to do, even if you're not comfortable with a lot of this sort of info. Here you can see we're doing a little bit of error checking. When I wrote the function, there was originally no item passed, and I passed in that error. I realized, oh, okay, you got to replace you got to include the item parameter by default, and then I just asked it to style the cards a bit more, so they pop, and it gave me some CSS. You can see here some example CSS, and once we got that working, I asked it to include the rest of the data values in the data structures returned by the API, and continue to make some nicer CSS. So that's how easy this stuff is to do using AI. Of course, you can use visual builders to help with this, but these days GPT, DeepSeek, Gemini, Claude are all able to do that sort of thing. Okay, so that should be very helpful in understanding how to really get working with projects here, even if you're not comfortable writing all of the code. If you understand the basics of how the framework works, so you put your template HTML in here, you bring in your templates up here using those couple lines, and then you start rendering as you need using the divs and the HTML tags that are included in your template. And let's see here, we have one more application. So this works very similarly. I think the idea here was just to show another repeating panel layout. So what we got here, there are no tables for this page. We're just gonna render some images on screen, and so I don't think we have a server module because we're not actually calling an API. All we're doing here for this little example is importing webcam repeating panel template. So in our index.html, it's basically just another empty div. We could really just keep a generic div, call this generic div, and use that on every page where we just want a div, wherever we're building these sorts of repeating panel card-like layouts. So we've got our webcam repeating panel div in the index.html, that's a template, bringing it into the application, and then again we have another render layout function that runs when the form loads. And here we've got just a base URL, and a bunch of additional image paths. So you can see if we go here, take that, and then add to that base URL one of these image file paths, we will get an image. If I change that to be one of these other file paths, let's do that here, we will get a different image. And these are live images that are being sent from this server. And so all we're doing here is we're finding our repeating panel div, calling it, labeling it with a variable repeating panel, emptying it just like we did in all the other examples. And then we have this list of file paths, which we've called image paths. So for each of those image paths, we are building a URL, which is the base URL plus the CAM URL that we go through for each of those items in the list. And we add a card. This is a bootstrap card. And then we create an image element. We set the source of it to be that full image URL that we've constructed, give it some alternate text, and set the styling a bit, and then we append that to a card body, and append that to this repeating panel, and that's it. So we've got our card, an image element, card body, appending to the card body some text, which here what we're doing is just taking the camera URL and splitting out the first part of it, so there's some text to display on the card, appending that to that card the image element that we've constructed up here, appending to the card again the card body that we've just created, and then appending the repeating panel for each of these loops, that card that we've created. So hopefully that makes sense. And at the end of all that, we're just running that function. So we define that function. As soon as the page loads, we import our template. Hopefully this is starting to make sense now. Create our function, then run our function. And that gives us this nice little layout. And importantly, we do have a little pile of CSS that was also generated very nicely by GPT. And you can see here, this is the styling for this webcam container. So we have our webcam repeating panel. You can see it's Flexbox with wrapping set up, some colors and borders and shadows and gaps and paddings and so on. Same thing here, a bunch of text centering and that sort of stuff. The hover effect again. And then the styling for the image and for the body text and so on. And so we get a nicely styled set of things. You can see here these cards contain a little bit of text that we styled and pulled out of the image file path. Okay, so I think that's enough for now. Hopefully that really gives you a little bit more of a direction to go in terms of building custom interfaces, and also using the built-in grid interface in Jam.py to interact with APIs and to build repeating panels. Those are some really important and commonly used sets of techniques and tools that you can really extrapolate on and build all sorts of useful applications with. And also super important, I think, these days to see how easy it is to do this without having to write really any manual code at all. Use GPT, ChatGPT, or Claude, or DeepSeek, or Gemini, or any of the open source generative AI models are absolutely fantastic at generating JavaScript and CSS and Python. So this is one of the things that really makes Jam.py very easily extensible, because the code that you need written, you can see from the interface here, is very, very easily created. And you can see here even that last example, it created all this CSS. Boy, does that save time and make it easy to build custom code very quickly. And it's fairly simple to go in and customize these things yourself. You want to change colors, you want to change the look a little bit. You can interact with the AI, or just go in and make manual changes yourself. But this makes Jam.py really especially productive, because you've got all of the IDE features you need here to build and edit your application without having to deal with the command line regularly, without having to upload files. You'll use a bunch of complicated tools in the tool chain. You just add your files, build your pages with the application builder, build your database with the no-code schema builders, build your tables as you need, and then add little bits of JavaScript to respond to events, write Python code to do any sort of really heavy lifting on the server, use generative AI to help build all that code and to help style any custom HTML and CSS. So I think at this point, it should be fairly clear how to accomplish most things, most common sorts of project goals with Jam.py. We'll continue to do some more examples here and maybe get into some bigger examples in the coming videos. Thanks for watching.